Obviously, with skin stuff, people are searching for the magic potion topically, and there just isn't one. I mean, I just did lab work on a 16-year-old boy where his testosterone is in the toilet. It's just heartbreaking to see some of what's going on. A lot of the medications are Band-Aids over bullet holes with sandpaper because they actually will aggravate the condition.
Welcome to the Wiser Than Before podcast, where each episode will get a little wiser. I'm your host, Josh Dodds. On this episode of Wiser Than Before, we talk about how to deal with breakouts and skin flares with functional esthetician Heidi Cooper. Heidi tells us why remedies that used to work, like diet changes and probiotics, don't work anymore and aren't enough on their own. We discover the two things that are more important than any creams or skincare routines. And Heidi pulls back the curtains and shows us what she does with her clients to get lasting results with their skin and hormone issues. Okay, welcome to the show, Heidi Cooper. Great to have you here.
Super excited to be here, Josh. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really excited to talk with you today too. You have a very interesting background. It sounds like you started as an esthetician and then over time through your own journey and some of your clients got into more of the functional health approach. And now you work with clients in that regard. So really excited to have you because I have a lot of listeners and also clients myself who obviously want their, good skin health, but aren't sure the best way to go about it. A lot of people, go to their dermatologist or try the conventional route. And maybe it helps, but eventually they don't want to stay on medications, or a lot of people react to the medications. And a lot of people are interested in trying more holistic, natural methods, but those don't always work for them either. So it's kind of a lot of people struggle to navigate those two paths and find their way to healthy skin and good health. So really excited to dive in and talk with you. So do I have that right? Did you start as an esthetician? And if so, what led to you moving to the more holistic side of things?
Such a long story that I'm going to try to condense. But, as many people in the functional medicine, holistic world space, it's a pain to purpose story, right? So the initial piece of my story goes way, way back as a teenager, went the conventional route and had all kinds of problems with acne as a teenager and was put on a number of medications and just was not getting the results, obviously, that like a full resolution, right, of symptoms. And really was starting to create a lot of other issues. And there were stronger medications were the recommendation. And even, it's kind of interesting because even as a teenager, I didn't want to go down that path. I had already been on antibiotics for a pretty extended period of time. And the next recommendation was Accutane, which is a pretty harsh medication that they use for acne, and just didn't want to do that, but was really struggling and having some pretty serious issues. So was introduced to an esthetician from overseas, and she just had a completely different approach, really worked with my nutrition. And I got some really amazing results. And so you got to remember, this was back in the 90s. This was a long, long time ago. And so some of those strategies were really supportive. And I ended up later down the road, working with her and had some great success with that for many years. But interestingly, I've been seeing clients now for, over 25 years, close to 30 years. And a lot of those initial strategies weren't even working anymore, probably close to 15 years ago. And so simultaneously, I was having issues with my own health, seeing things with clients where nutrition is foundational, and that's really a huge piece, but something had shifted, right? And so there was just more to the story. And so that's really what got me to go back to school for the functional medicine piece and really dig a little bit deeper to find out what was going on with my clients and myself to get resolution. Because we're seeing a lot of hormone shifts, hormone challenges, and clients were coming back from their medical providers with lab work, and their medical providers were saying that they looked great. Everything looked fine. But I could tell from looking at their skin, there were some pretty serious issues. So that's what kind of got me on that path to go and dig a little bit deeper. And I'm so grateful now, going back to the pain to purpose piece, that we had some of those challenges to contend with, because I just feel like there are some answers that we have now for people that are you just can't find anywhere else. I think you really, to have, to be able to kind of deal with these stressors that people are having, like chemical, emotional, physical stressors, and really get to the root cause of why some of these issues are happening. It's a real blessing now to be able to support that for them.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, because it sucks when you're going through it, but it is really true. Like out on the other side, you really learn about yourself, like what it takes for you to stay healthy, how to do that in the modern world with all these different competing messages we get, and that it can be a blessing on the other side. So you said something interesting. You said some of the things that used to work stopped working, and then that's part of what prompted you to go back to school. What are those things that you saw that got you results, or maybe used to get people results that weren't getting it done anymore?
So, this esthetician that I worked with back in the 90s, one of the things that she would recommend for clients would be lactobacillus acidophilus, right? So, like, it's kind of funny now because probiotics are pretty mainstream thing, right? But back then, like, it was really hard to even find that. And so, I think it was just much simpler back then to kind of make some tweaks. So you could give somebody a probiotic, you could shift some things with the diet. And interestingly, Josh, what would happen a lot of times is we would change some things up with a client's diet strategy for maybe like 3 months or something. It wasn't even a long extended period of time, but just have them eating more whole food items, that sort of thing. And even in that period of time, like maybe taking dairy out, that's always tends to be very inflammatory for skin issues. They could take those items out for maybe a few months at a time, and then we would have them actually slowly reintroduce it, and they would do fine. And, now going back to that, like 15 years ago, you would have people that would be eating really whole food items, taking dairy out completely, really doing a lot of things right, and they were still really struggling with their skin and sometimes a lot of other health issues as well. But that would be some of the main things that we would see is that, previously back in the 90s, you could make some of those tweaks for a very short period of time and get a really amazing result. And these are things people didn't even have to, stick to long term necessarily. And they would still have these amazing results. It would almost be kind of like a reset for the body. And of course, we never encouraged people to go out and eat a bunch of garbage after they got finished with their skin clearing up, but they just would, kind of recognize that they didn't have to be so strict and they would still have those results. And then, like I shared, probably 15 years ago, people were really, really very disciplined with their diet and still they were having those issues.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I actually myself went through something similar with allergies. My sister gave me this book kind of out of the blue, the GAPS book, and it's all about diet and what the standard American diet will do to your gut and digestive health, and then what that does to your body. And when I read that, it blew my mind. I just never knew any of it. Now it is a much more common knowledge, and people are more aware that what you eat is important. But it shook me so much that I just immediately started implementing it. And within 2 months, like all my allergy symptoms went away. I had more energy. I slept better. I felt stronger. I was getting more in shape from less working out, and just all these other things that skin improved too. All these things I didn't even know were issues or could be improved, just boom, like that. And then fast forward 10 years, and a couple years ago had some big health challenges, and I turned back to diet because it was so profound the first time, and it's just like what you're saying. It just wasn't enough. So very interesting. So what, when you were originally doing that, what kind of results are we talking about? You said their skin cleared up. Is it like minor acne, or was it bigger things that were improved with just, and you said it's like 3 months, cut out some dairy. What other kind of things did they do, and what kind of results did people see?
So my original, work as an esthetician was working under the lady that was my mentor originally, and she owned a skincare clinic. So we saw all kinds of, eczemas, really severe acnes. I mean, you kind of name it, like the full gamut. And there were a number of different, skin challenges that people would come see us at that clinic for. But interestingly, even back then, a lot of the same dietary shifts, kind of similar to your story. Initially, would really have a cascading effect on whether it was eczema or acne or, all of those different skin challenges really benefited greatly from just, I think, probably bringing down the inflammation and giving the body more of the nutrition that it actually needs, right? With more of that whole foods diet. So we would see really complete resolution of these things with I would say, compared to what clients are having to do now with minimal effort, right? Um, it wasn't even as strict as, like, say, the GAPS diet, for instance, which is a fantastic program, fantastic diet, but they didn't even have to do like anything that disciplined in order to get some of these results. And so, like I said, they would get full resolution. Now, obviously, we would work with things topically too. There was some light therapy that this esthetician had in this clinic, which was from Europe and not real commonly used here, which is real supportive of some of those skin conditions as well. But as you know, you could be doing topical therapies all day long, and if you don't address the internal piece, you're just not going to get very far.
Right. Absolutely. So, and soon here, I want to fast forward and get to more like present day, what's working and what people are needing to do with you. But the reason I'm asking about what used to work is because I think there's so many people who read a book or read a blog or hear a podcast and like, okay, I need to cut out dairy, like you said earlier. And they do it and they get, a little change or maybe none at all. And they're like, oh, this, none of this works because they're following the steps, but it's just not happening. So I think it makes sense that, at one point it did. And that's why, people hear about these things, but maybe today it's not enough. So why do you think that's changed? Why do you think it's not enough today and there's more that needs to be done?
It's so interesting because when I was kind of having some of my own health challenges, which I shared earlier, were kind of coincided simultaneously with things going on with clients, I didn't know what all of the answers were either, but I did recognize that people were more stressed, right? And I felt more stressed. I think it was a time when like the smartphone started becoming a thing. You're checking email from your phone. There's just more coming at you. One of the things that I remember thinking distinctly is, years ago when I was younger, when you asked somebody how they were, the automatic response wasn't busy. And now, and really for probably the past 15 years, maybe longer, the response has been that people are busy. I don't know that that's a healthy thing, but that's like kind of a cultural norm, right? So interesting to kind of look at that now, and see how that's factored in, right? So I think now, like after having all of the functional medicine training and seeing the different moving parts of what's going on with people individually, I think it really comes down to stressors being chemical. So some of the toxins that we're exposed to environmentally, emotional stressors. So there's a lot going on in the world that can contribute to that for sure. And just going back to even we're being bombarded with technology, I think can kind of play into that emotional stress too. If people are reading things on social media, that's can be like an emotional stressor, and then physical stressors. So we see people that are meaning well by exercising, which I'm a huge advocate of, but maybe they're trying to get results with things and actually doing more harm or just pushing the body's limits with, when we say physical stressors, maybe even like lack of sleep. And because that's something that's very common in our culture today as well, is living on, minimal amount of sleep. And obviously that doesn't support our design either. So I think the crux of it, most people's issues are one of those three things, or more likely a combination of all of those three things. And just really trying to dial in with lab work and assessments and really getting to know what's going on with the client, like what that looks like for them and how best to address it.
Okay. Very cool. So you're using labs as part of your work with people. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's great because the things you mentioned, that's basically the modern life.
Yeah.
It's everything. It's food, it's stress, it's schedule, smartphones, that's not going away ever. And so there's a lot of potential factors in there. So I think another thing people struggle with when they say, okay, either the medication's not working or I want something more natural or root cause, there's a million different things they could go after, So for example, if they cut out dairy and that's not enough, or it does get frustrating to hear. Like, I know people get sick of hearing like, oh, just lower your stress. Like,
Right.
what does that mean?
Right.
Or I'm stressed trying to lower my stress.
Yes.
And I get it, because there's so many, different things they could do. Or sleep, for example. Like, almost everybody I know feels they don't sleep enough or wants to sleep a little better. But they're not quite sure how to go about it, or they might try, one or two things, and those might work for other people, but not for specifically them. So it really takes a keen eye to kind of narrow down what's going to make the biggest difference for an individual. What in addition to labs do you find most helpful for narrowing that down?
We use a really comprehensive intake form that really goes over every little piece of lifestyle, nutrition, all of that with a client before we see them. And then we work a lot with Cellcore Biosciences, and they have a really fantastic clinical assessment form. And with that clinical assessment form, it really correlates a lot of symptoms to different health challenges, or maybe different reasons for some of what might be going on. So there's, for instance, like a section on parasites, which we see a lot of parasitic infections connected to skin issues. And this is one of those things where I would say, well, maybe there's more of a parasite challenge for people because they're so run down from some of the other things, or it creates a vulnerability, or just some of the other components to this clinical assessment form. Maybe there could be like mycotoxins from a mold exposure or something like that. But what's so helpful with that piece a lot of times is working with that clinical assessment form. It's not lab work, but it may show us where we need to dig a little bit deeper to find what the source is for the individual and how best to address that for them too. So we always like to take a look at all of that first before we recommend lab work for people, just to make sure that their resources are being allocated in the way that's going to be most effective for them and most supportive for their situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I do the same. It's very easy to burn a lot of money on labs very quickly. So I agree, starting with the history and then kind of narrowing down what labs are likely to be most helpful. Do you have people who are quite surprised to find they have parasites, or is your patient population, they're kind of already down that realm and aware of that possibility?
Yeah, I don't think anybody ever wants to hear they have parasites, right? But I do think it's becoming a little bit more common, and people are a little bit more familiar with that. And if they aren't familiar with that prior to coming to see us, we just do try to provide a lot of education on why that might be the case too. But yeah, that's just one piece of the puzzle again too. I think something that we run into a lot, and you may as well, is that most people are looking for like the magic bullet, like the one thing, right? Like, is it the parasites? Is it the dairy? Is it the whatever that they've read about online? And there's so many different factors involved that it's rarely, I mean, in my experience, it's rarely like the one thing, right? There's typically multifactorial and a number of different components going on to why somebody is dealing with some of these things. And then, like we talked about earlier, like the stress, right? And so the stress is such a huge component that's the body's having to manage all of that all the time, that really providing supportive strategies on how to deal with that and maybe some tools to support that can be really helpful as well. One of the things that I did earlier this year is went and got some training in limbic system rewiring, because I feel like that's such a critical piece of the healing puzzle for people too, is just like you mentioned earlier, like everybody wants to be less stressed. And you can, you can work with deep breathing, which is really important. And there are some strategies that you can work with, prayer and meditation and those sorts of things. But for some people, they just need more than that. I think especially since we're being kind of bombarded with so much these days. And so there's just different pieces to that puzzle as well. And I think that stress management component is probably top priority, and something that I've really looked at within the last year as being pretty critical for success if we don't get that managed first.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I totally agree. In addition to people, people wanting to know what's the one thing, like you said,
Right.
that's very common because that's just kind of how we're taught, in our conventional medical system. It's what's the one pill I need to, fix this all, really to make these symptoms go away. But then, they come back or something else will come back later. And the other thing along that note that I notice people is that we're all educated to believe, okay, if I'm sick, if I'm ill, if I'm unhealthy, there is a pill that can change that. So I find that people are really like open or looking for, the supplements, or say there's, antiparasitics, things like that. But there's a lot less understanding around the nervous system or again, stress. Like I said, everyone will say lower your stress, but not so much concrete. So that's great. You're doing the limbic system rewiring. How much do you find that to be a, key component, and what kind of changes do you see from it? Can you give us some specifics? 'Cause I think people still in general, they don't equate it. They're like, oh, if I lower my stress, this will actually happen. Or if I do some limbic system retraining, what's actually going to come from it? Because that takes a little work. It's not the same as just popping a pill.
Yes, you hit the nail on the head with that. So, with all of this, with all of the holistic approach and functional medicine approach, it is not as simple as popping a pill or even taking a supplement, right? And so there's so much more involved. And yes, with the limbic system rewiring, these are exercises people have to do daily. And if they are going back to if they're in a super stressed out state, they're not always they're already in a place of overwhelm and procrastination. And to take one additional thing on can be a lot. So I've really worked with in the past several months, just trying to find some supportive tools for them that are not so involved, that are not necessarily going to rewire the limbic system, but start to calm the nervous system down a little bit. So I don't know if you've worked with it's called an Apollo Neuro. There's a really cool wearable device that was developed a few years ago that actually communicates. It uses sound waves, so these vibrations kind of touch the skin and they communicate with the brain to calm the nervous system down. So I feel like things like that, there are some really cool tools that we can work with now too to kind of support nervous system response, nervous system regulation, get somebody into a parasympathetic state, which is a rest and digest state, and get the body in a little bit more of an environment conducive for healing too. So I've been kind of playing with that a little bit with clients too. Like, hey, I know to do a whole limbic system rewiring program. Maybe you're not in a place to do that yet, but let's start with, the Apollo Neuro. I don't know if you've worked with Brain Tap. It's basically a meditation app that they call it meditation with technology. So I think 1 20-minute brain tap session is the equivalent to, I think, 6 to 7 sleep cycles, or it puts the body through 6 to 7 sleep cycles. So there's just some things like that we have started to introduce to clients as well. That once again, these are not things that fix the entire problem or rewire the limbic system, but they do get the body's stress response lowered a little bit. And I feel like it can make the body more receptive to other forms of treatment, whether it be limbic system rewiring or even success with their supplement protocols, right? Going back to, if the body's just in this stressed out state all the time, how can we really move the needle even with supplements? I always share with my clients, I feel like we might be doing damage control at best, because all of those resources that the body has as far as energy goes and nutrition are being allocated towards, dampening or managing the stress response.
And you're saying it with the supplements, what they can do at that time when a person's that stressed, it's basically damage control.
Right.
And then you're bringing in the limbic system, the neural training to decrease that stress so the body can actually start being a place to heal.
Yes. I have really, I feel like we work with some really great protocols and people get amazing results. But if I'm working with somebody that they have gotten amazing results working with a protocol and then they go off of it and, a lot of those symptoms start to reappear, or, they don't get full resolution from what's going on, then that's really kind of one of the pieces that clued me in, like, hey, these are the people that are either executives or entrepreneurs, high stress level individuals that we have got to manage that piece of it in order for them to get a better long-term result.
Right. So you said when people come in, they're looking for like, what's the one thing causing it, which I've done too. The other thing I find that people are looking for is how long? Like, how long is this going to take? What do you find as an average timeline for someone to make a meaningful change that, like you said, it'll actually last and stick around? It won't just disappear as soon as they get off a protocol.
So really how I try to approach things is, once we do like some of those assessments that I shared, or we do, and or lab work on somebody where we really get a good idea of what's going on and how best to address that. I always tell my clients, like, we're trying to approach this from two different strategies. One is a long game strategy, right? Whether it's parasites or mycotoxins or different infections, co-infections that the body's dealing with, or other toxin exposures like, glyphosate and some of the other things that we're exposed to. Those are the things that are really filling the bucket up, right? Where the bucket has started to overflow, where we're seeing a lot of this dysfunction going on. The long game strategy is to really address those and do some cellular detoxification to offload some of that burden on the body. However, when we work with just that piece, people aren't always getting, they may, depending on where they are, start to feel better. But in some cases, that's the long game strategy, right? So they're not always feeling better right away. One of the things that I really try to support my clients with is some natural things to support symptoms while we're working on that long game so that they start to feel and see improvements in a pretty short period of time. So if somebody's working with me and they haven't seen some sort of shift within a month, I would say that's a very rare thing, because we're really trying to kind of come at it from two different strategies, right? I would say in some cases we're using natural Band-Aids to help with symptoms, but I always share with my clients, hey, those things are not going to work long-term if we don't address this other component of things. What will happen is you'll either feel like you need to increase the dosage of those, or they'll just stop working because the actual reason that some of these things are presenting and some of these symptoms are there is not being addressed. So, once again, these things are a result of, once you start having symptoms, a lot of times these things have been problematic for years, the root cause reasons, right? It's the building up of all of the exposures to things, the system breakdown, the body having to manage all of this. So it can be a long time before those symptoms present. So I would never give anybody the idea that like in 1 month, we're going to have this all resolved. I just would hope that they would see improvements with what we're working with in a month. And in some cases, it can be, depending on how compromised, how long somebody's been compromised. I mean, it could be, 6 months to a year before we start to really move the needle, and sometimes longer, depending on how long someone has been compromised and how long their body's been managing some of these things. So that's the hard sell with people, right? Instead of just taking a drug from a medical provider that is going to magically make them feel better, but we know doesn't really address the long-term piece, is really having them understand that it's a commitment. There's a strategy to this. There's a commitment to it. I'm sure you've seen that graph before that shows healing. It's just not a linear thing, right? And it can take some time in order to get those long-term results. So
is that the one that looks like a bee like flew all
like
over
a little yes, like that squiggly, like all over the place, and it's like it is not like a linear upward trajectory, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, the expectation, we never set the expectation that everything is going to be resolved in a few weeks and or a month, or when you're talking about cellular detoxification, for instance, I mean that is years of collective things breaking down cellular health, mitochondrial function, the body producing energy efficiently and properly. So there's a lot that needs to be done in order to really support that effectively.
Right. I feel like that's a challenging thing to wrap your head around. I know for me it was, especially when I first got sick, because the body can go a long time before it starts to show that wear and tear and break down. Or it may give, looking back, you can see little signals, but during it, you're just, you just keep going. Like I could keep functioning. I could live my life. I could keep living in that stress and, knew it wasn't the best thing, but I'm like, whatever, you're stressed. You're like, I got to keep going with life. So you can go and do that for a lot of years. And then on the flip side, like you said, then it takes some time to unwind, and it's just not the way our minds work, more linearly. So if things don't change in a month, human beings tend to project out and be like, oh God, this is, going to be like this for years and years, when really it's more of like an exponential curve. Like every month you go, you get, a bigger shift on average. But yeah, we kind of expect it. I remember when I got chronically ill, and which is, something that's more long-term. You can't just snap your fingers and fix it. But I kept expecting it to be more like the flu. You get the flu, you get knocked out, you feel terrible for a few days, and then you bounce back pretty quick. And that's what I kept waiting for, that bounce back, and would go, days and weeks and months, and it never came. It was a much more gradual process out. And it's, if you haven't gone through it, I don't know how you would fully understand it in your mind. So it does take some time for people to get used to that and wrap their mind around it. But I think once they do, as long as they're seeing some progress each month, then I find people are, they're on board and they'll stick with the process. But that's nice. You sounds like you can give them some natural things early on to help. Like you said, it might be a Band-Aid, but it's a better Band-Aid than, medication. Like especially with the skin issues, I have clients who they understand the things we talk about. They're on board. They're following the program, but then they'll get a flare, maybe like a bad eczema flare or something, and that's the moment where they, they're too much pain or discomfort, and they'll go back to the dermatologist and get, maybe a corticosteroid cream or something and apply it. And then half the time it doesn't work, or it creates another issue of its own. But I understand where they're coming from. They're like, this is just too far, and they're, looking for something to put out the fire. What are your favorite, natural recommendations to help people, keep things a little more stable while they're on that deeper healing path?
I think it depends on what's going on with the person, obviously, right? So like if it's, let's just say like we'll use like hormonal acne, right? So we might work with some like hormone balancing herbs to kind of support what's going on there. But once again, like if there is a parasitic issue or some other, toxicity issue going on, that's driving that hormonal imbalance, we're just not going to get like long-term results working with hormone balancing herbs, right? And so that's what I'm talking about. And that's what I feel like you've probably seen this too. In the functional medicine world, they're kind of doing a lot of the same things that they're doing in the allopathic world, from the standpoint of like, okay, you've got hormone stuff going on, like this is a supplement, or like this is a supplement instead of a drug for your hormone problem, instead of going upstream and really trying to kind of dig deeper and find out, well, like, oh my gosh, like they're in their 30s, like they shouldn't be having a hormone issue, like why is that going on? And really trying to address a little bit, a little bit more upstream in as far as how that works and what's going on there. And then there are topical solutions for skin stuff too. Well, I say topical solutions, almost topical Band-Aids, right? So things that we might work with to kind of strengthen the skin or support skin health, expedite the healing a little bit. There's a number of things that we'll work with there. There's a oil. I don't know how familiar you are with like C60. It's a really powerful antioxidant. I feel like it works really well for eczema. It can work well for many different things, but because it's such a powerful antioxidant, once again, it's not fixing everything topically, but a lot of times you can get symptoms to subside. Another thing that I'm a big fan of is, I don't know if you've worked with systemic formulas before, they have a product called WO oil. It's really great for breakouts, sometimes for eczema too. It's it kind of covers all the bases. So it's WO China healing oil. And so what I find is it uses the 5 elements of Chinese medicine, but it's a antifungal, antiparasitic, antibacterial, antimicrobial. It kind of covers all the bases. And a lot of times we'll see that component to whether it's acne breakout or eczema, there's some sort of disruption in the skin microbiome from some organism that's trying to kind of take over too. And that can be a great little natural band-aid to work with too, just kind of depending on what it is that the person is presenting with as to how effective something like that might be.
Yeah. Very cool. But it's great just for people to hear these options and have it.
Yeah.
Because I've had so many times where a client will go the steroid cream route and they'll come back. And I work closely next to a DO, and she does osteopathic manipulation, and she really specializes in like skin and immune issues. And she'll tell me so many people come in and she'll see the steroids that they've taken over time go deep in the body.
Yes.
And so she's over many sessions working on the fascia, the skin, the organs,
yes.
ligaments, tendons, everything. And she says it just takes a lot of work to pull that stuff out, and then
yes.
So someone does that, and then 3 years down the line, things are moving slowly, and that can be part of the issue. But a person would never connect that normally. You'd think,
for
okay,
sure.
I just rub the cream on my skin, and I'm still having issues. So yeah, just to have something in your emergency kit or something like that won't be as likely to cause long-term damage, but can maybe give some short-term relief to allow them to stick with the program.
Absolutely, to kind of help expedite healing, deal with what we can topically while we're kind of addressing the internal piece. But yes, you're so right about the steroids. They really can weaken the skin significantly. People can have like situations where they actually have like steroid withdrawal. I'm sure you're familiar with that too, where they really become dependent on it, and it's a problem because it's weakening things so much that they have to use more and more and higher, stronger amounts, and it's just creating so much damage. It can be really difficult to kind of wean people off of that and support the skin health. And you're right. I feel like a lot of the medications are band-aids over bullet holes with sandpaper, because they actually will aggravate the condition or create other issues. They might at best like create some minor symptom relief, but there's so many long-term consequences for a lot of that if we can keep people away from that, or at least if they have been doing something like that, try to do things supportive so that they can get off of those things and minimize some of that damage, for sure.
Hey there. I hope you're enjoying this conversation, but you know what? I want to bring you even better content in the future. One way you can make sure that happens is by hitting the follow button on your phone in Apple Podcast, Spotify, or whatever app you prefer. Now, if we're being honest with each other, you and I both know there's no way you're going to do this later. So let's take 7 seconds right now, and I'll walk you through the process. Pull out your phone, unlock it, and open Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the listening app of your choice. Now search for Wiser Than Before Podcast and hit follow. In Apple, that's the plus sign in the top right corner. And in Spotify, it's the button with the word follow just below the logo. That's it. You're all done. Doesn't it feel good to cross an item off your to-do list? Thank you for doing that. By hitting that follow button, you are actively bringing better guests and content to this podcast. Now, let's get back to the show. Anything else you do or kind of walk people through, maybe even, teach them to help them get through those flares? Because that's what I see the most with the skin is when it's a flare, it's just, they're literally, on fire, and it's a 5-alarm fire, and they have a tough time sticking with or even caring about a protocol or long-term healing in that moment, because they're just so miserable. So I feel like a lot of people, either listening to this or searching for their skin issue, eczema issues, like that's one of the number one things. Like if I could just manage those times, then they can be a little more calm and have the sanity to follow through with some type of more natural healing program.
Well, and Josh, to your point with that too, personally, like having been somebody that struggled with pretty severe skin issues at one point, like it's talk about stressful, right? Like people can see, like unlike maybe other health issues people have where it's not as visible, people can visibly see when you've got something going on, and the stress of people making comments about it, or like unsolicited suggestions about what they should do. I mean, there's a lot of stress that is involved with that. And so, to your point, anything that they can get that will provide some relief, and on top of it, it's painful a lot of times, painful, annoying, itchy, painful. So I think there's a number of different things we try to support with topically, depending on what the situation is. Another thing that can be really helpful a lot of times is red light therapy too. I'm sure you're very familiar with that. Just supportive on a mitochondrial level, like on a cellular level for cellular health. Once again, that doesn't always fix everything, but sometimes if people can have some of those devices on hand, it can strengthen that area a little bit. It has systemic benefits working with that too. So there's just a number of different strategies that hopefully something out of that arsenal can be helpful and supportive for that person while we're trying to walk through some of the other things and really address some of the deeper issues sometimes too.
With the red light therapy, if someone's going to do that, what's a good, strength or frequency, something they should shoot for to, or at least to, how long should they give it to decide whether, they like the benefits or not?
Yeah, I like, I think some of the research shows between like 625, 650 to 850 nanometers with some of the light therapy. I know there's a device from a company called Higher Dose, which I've started recommending a lot. There's they have like a face mask that you can use, but it's a moldable, bendable, flexible device so that you could actually use it on other areas of the body as well, which I really like as well. But that's a great, that's been a great recommendation for my clients. They've really seen some great things with that too. And, with the red light therapy, if you were having some really pretty severe issues going on, I think you'd really, if you could work with that daily, as long as possible to kind of help promote healing would be really beneficial. And it just depends. I mean, if you can do a 15-minute session, that's fantastic. You don't necessarily have to be working with it on hours on end in order to get a result with it. Red light therapy is something that typically between 15 and 30 minutes, you can really get some amazing benefits from working with that. So, and I think just a reminder too, that it's far beyond the skin, some of those benefits in working with that too. So it might be something that, once again, even helps with the nervous system response because it's working on a cellular level too. So, I would really give something like that at least a month shot, of working with it to see if there are some benefits. And I'm pretty sure, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think Higher Dose has like a 30-day money back guarantee or something like that too. So you could try something like that relatively risk-free just to kind of see if it was something that was helpful. But then, like I shared, some of those other strategies too, could be supportive as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. And it's a great point that you made that these things are helping not just with the main symptom, like skin in this case we're talking about, but more systemic, total body, mitochondria, which are in every cell of the body. And it's a great point just for anyone with a chronic health issue, because a lot of times you get so focused on the symptom, what's causing the pain, what's annoying me day to day. And there's a disconnect to realizing that there's this painful symptom, but it's not just because, there's a skin issue, or not just because there's a parasite. There's systemic overall health of the body is compromised some way, somehow. And that to resolve it, your systemic overall health will need to be improved. So there's some of these things seem indirect, but it's like, if you want a long-term result, you don't want to be rotating doctors every year or in and out and, year after year trying the next thing. That's really when I see people start to change. Like their, let's call it health issue, start to make a permanent change when they understand that and start to, follow a treatment plan or really like align their lives with that understanding.
Well, and I will tell you too, what I always tell people, like when they first start working with me, is like one of my favorite things that I love that I get to do now with just operating from this holistic functional medicine perspective is somebody might be coming to me initially for skin, right? They're having a skin challenge or a hormone challenge or something like that. But what I love is that I always tell them, I'm like, there are things I guarantee that you're probably dealing with that you have no idea are connected to other things that, like you shared earlier, just symptoms that people kind of start to live with, like things that are nuances, but they don't really, like they've lived with it for a while. So they don't even like recognize that it's an issue anymore, that start to be resolved once you start working on the whole person, right? So whether it's disturbed sleep or gut issues or, other things that people have just kind of resided themselves to, like, that's just how they are, or they've just learned to live with it for so long. We get to improve all of that. And I get excited about not only changing the trajectory of the direction of where their health is going, but really educating people on these things to help them share this information with their loved ones as well. And I feel like collectively, those of us in this space really have the opportunity to really impact people in a really significant way, really impact, our country, the world in a very significant way by sharing some of this information. And then one of the other things that we do too is have people reassess on a fairly regular basis. We'll send a reassessment form because, to your point, I think it's just human nature to kind of focus on like whatever the symptom at the time is, or the thing that's the most irritating or annoying or whatever at the time, and not really remember like how far they've come. So when we do some of these reassessments on a regular basis with them, maybe every couple months or so, it's a great reminder for them, like how much improvement they've seen in areas that they are not even recognizing. Because to your point, when some of this stuff has really been chronic and going on for a long time, just like some of it shifted gradually in the negative, it shifts positively gradually as well. And they don't always see the improvements the way that we do,
Yeah. That kind of stuff is so cool. Because like you said, they're not even expecting it. They're coming in for one issue. I love the energy or mental clarity when that flips on and someone realizes like, oh, this is the real me. Like I've been living in a fog for the past decade, 2 decades. And they just feel what it's like to be, themselves again, a full energy human being, full mental capacity. It's so fun. It's like adult Christmas, basically.
It is. It's the best. I love it. It's really my favorite part about what we get to do, for sure.
So what are some of the misconceptions, you'd say the most common misconceptions that people come in with? We might have already covered some of them, but I find when people come in and then over time through working with you, through doing their own process, that they start to learn or see the other side of. What would you say is kind of the most common misunderstandings initially?
Well, here's the thing, I would say on one hand, it's so great that there's like through technology and social media, that there is so much more information available to people about holistic health or functional medicine. But at the same time, I always share with my clients, like not all information necessarily pertains to them, right? So you can have, we see this in our space all the time. Like somebody will be kind of promoting like a specific diet or whatever information. And so our clients kind of gravitate and think, oh, like if I really stick to this, like I'll have improvements, and then they do those things and then they don't get the improvements. And then they kind of feel defeated, or they feel like they've tried it all. And we know that maybe some of the information that somebody is sharing may be helpful for one person. And depending on what an individual has going on, there's just more to uncover and more to address. So I would say a lot of times the diet piece is, somebody will come in and say, well, I've tried all the diets and like none of that's worked. And, I feel like the diet is foundational. You have to have a whole foods diet. You have to have that supportive piece. I share with my clients, like you can't be driving through McDonald's 3 times a day and hope for us to have really great success, with what we're trying to accomplish for you. But at the same time, there's more to it, right? So it's that whole You'll never get well without changing the diet. That's foundational, but the diet alone will never get you well. There's just more to the story a lot of times for people now. And the things that need to be addressed are much greater than the diet alone. However, they have to change the diet in order to have, foundationally, once again, for success there too. So I would say that's a big one. Obviously with skin stuff too, we see a lot of topical things that people are searching for the magic potion topically. And there just isn't one, like I shared some things a little bit earlier that are really supportive and can be very helpful. But man, Josh, you could use those all day long. You could buy all the stuff topically and you will still have problems when it's an internal challenge that's happening. And I couldn't even tell you, how many years it's been since somebody's worked with something topically and gotten full resolution off of that. It's just unheard of now, right? Because there's so much more to the story. You can't just work with that piece and expect full resolution to occur. So I think that's it a lot of times too. There's, so much skincare and skin products that are, promoted here now that people, I think assume that they're going to find the magical thing that's going to fix their skin challenge that way. And it just doesn't work that way. There's just more to it. So I would say those are probably the two main things that I see is that somebody's tried a diet, they're frustrated because that didn't fix everything, or they're looking for the magical topical solution. And yeah, there are some really great things that work, but once again, they're just not going to get full resolution until the entire person is addressed and their root cause reason for why that's happening is addressed.
Yeah. I love it. That's so valuable what you just said. That could save somebody years off their health journey, like literally years, because you're right. There is, especially nowadays, there's so much information, so many different people, doctors, influencers, social media that have their own take, right? And it's a little bit different. So people, hear about 10 different this is the one and solution and try it, and it does get frustrating, especially the food one, because people gluten and dairy are usually the first two to go, and that's people's favorite food and they miss it. It's very hard for them to go off it, so they make this big effort, do it, and then they're like, I'm still stuck with these allergies or the skin issue. It did nothing, so they get a little disheartened, and that's where I think finding the right practitioner is just invaluable, because you could, I can't even tell you how much time in Facebook groups reading these, and that's the worst place, because you get everybody listing their one supplement or solution. So, they tried 100 different supplements, and some help, some don't, but it's 100 supplements, and when I found the right practitioner to really help me and help me understand some of the things we're talking about, just everything started moving. But it's tricky because, most people have to go through a number of practitioners too. So you start to get a little jaded and be like, no one has the answer. And it is a little disheartening, and, you just have to keep going till you find the right person.
Yes.
But then when you do, I love what you're saying. It's working with someone skilled or on your own, but either way, you need to figure out the, kind of the multiple pillars, and it's going to be multiple. It's not just going to be this diet. It's not just going to be this supplement. It's not just going to be this therapy. It's probably going to be a combination of several of those things and some more. Like you said, it's a bit more complex nowadays, especially the last 3 years with everyone's stress levels sky high. So that's a great thing for people to understand that, there probably won't be one golden ticket, and how do you stack up the right things for you? And that's what I think could be valuable you got to find a good resource somewhere, whether it's practitioner or otherwise.
Yes. I don't know if you have felt like this. I just, because I was having so many clients coming to me, with information that they had found online or through social media that was not really correct information, I was really determined to go and share some information that through, working with clients in a clinical setting and, in a virtual setting for so many years have found to be truly effective. But But the diet piece, I'm really cautious about what I share with that because that can look so different from person to person too, right? And then I think there becomes a lot of stress involved with that too, because people get really rigid with the diet, and then that becomes a big stressor. They can't really go out and enjoy life because they feel so restricted, and um, that can create its own set of issues. So, I would say if we can kind of stick to whole foods, dairy does tend to be a real problem with skin stuff, gluten, also sugar in general, right? But I think to really make it so rigid and stressful for people has its own set of issues too. And so I know that that's not the answer either, making people feel like they have to be perfect with things all the time.
Oh, it's such a good point because that can really quickly add to the stress, to the emotional stress, the nervous system dysregulation. It's completely true. Where do you like to start with diet? Do you do labs for food or food allergies, or do you, like you said, you start with whole foods, cut out sugar, and then proceed from there?
If somebody, I used to years ago, we used to do a lot of food sensitivity tests, and it's really interesting because I think inevitably what ended up happening was, people would be really, really disciplined about sticking to like maybe what they, like staying away from what they should stay away from and eating more of what they should. But then we were seeing that because a lot of times the root cause reason of why some of this is going on wasn't addressed, they would just develop different sensitivities. And the more you kind of understand about some of that stuff too, it can shift, right? Like the food sensitivity thing can really shift in a very short period of time. So going back to like, you can spend a gajillion dollars on labs. We just really felt like that was not where we wanted our clients to invest their money. And what we'll do now is if there's a lot of gut issues going on in conjunction with some of the skin stuff, we'll do something like a gut zoomer from Vibrant Labs. That is more, I feel like, a gut function test. That doesn't fix everything, or, like going back to the parasite thing, that doesn't always pick everything up there either. But sometimes there can be things that we see in a test like that can be very supportive, as far as, hey, probably want to stay away from gluten. We're seeing some markers that are saying it's really kind of creating some damage there, and that sort of thing. So for the most part, to answer your question, like we don't do food sensitivity tests. We try to have a client stick with more whole food items. Like I shared, I think in general, we've seen dairy be pretty inflammatory and gluten be pretty inflammatory with skin issues. But I always tell my clients, Josh, like don't expect this to fix the problem, right? Because it's just one piece of the puzzle. It may be lowering the inflammatory burden on the body, but don't be disappointed when you take some of this stuff out and I know it's hard for some people and things don't magically all go away because it's just one piece of that puzzle. So I would say for most people, that's kind of where we start. We will do some nutrition coaching for people that need a little bit more support with that, kind of meeting people where they are. Some people come to us and they're already pretty disciplined with their eating, and that's fantastic. And some people literally have been driving through McDonald's 3 times a day and have no idea where to start. So, we can support that as well, just kind of depending on where they are.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. I think that's great. I think a lot of people actually have almost like a PTSD from working with certain practitioners because they got such rigid, dietary direction. And yeah, like you said, they're just already in overwhelm, not feeling well. And it was just too much. And I agree, it can change. So that makes it really tough to, be on a really strict plan. And then, suddenly, 3 more things are causing issues. And maybe some of the things you're avoiding would be fine to add back in, so it certainly can move. And like I said earlier, I kind of went through both sides of it. Like 15 years ago when I tried the GAPS diet, that was life-changing. But it was very rigid and it took a lot of, my time and effort at that time. But then fast forward 3 years ago and I got long COVID, and that was just kind of the straw that broke the camel's back and revealed all these underlying things that never totally got fixed. As good as I felt with the diet, it didn't fix some of the, parasites and infections I got from all my traveling, backpacking around developing countries in my 20s and things like that. So when I long COVID, one of the things that really became an issue is my liver, like a lot of liver pain and problems, and liver is very, important in digestion. So I felt terrible after most meals, and I tried everything, cycling through every kind of diet and take out this food and add this one back in and only eat whole foods and things like that. And eventually it got to the point where it's like, okay, it's just where I'm at. Like my liver is struggling and my body, is hurting after some meals. And I just need to keep going with these other things I'm doing. I mean, I still kept eating the best food, but to your point, there was no perfect diet. Like my body was just struggling at that time and needed some boost from the ground up. And then over time that really resolved. So that was a lot. That approach worked better than trying to get the perfect diet and spending 80% of my day tweaking, this food and that food and things like that.
Well, and I've been there too, Josh. I mean, I kind of shared briefly, like I had some health challenges, 15-ish years ago now, and was very disciplined with my diet, and I went through this whole thing too, where like I was really rigid with that, and like was not getting better, right? Like it was not fixing the problem. So then that becomes like totally stressful in a different way then too. It's like I'm eating better than anybody I know. Like I make everything, like from scratch, and everything's organic, and so once again, like that's helpful foundationally. I would often think, man, how bad would I feel if I wasn't doing this stuff, right? Like it certainly helps, but we are just living, I think, in the most toxic time in history on all fronts, right? Like all of it. And so it just makes it really difficult for our bodies to function the way that they were designed to when there's all of this interference going on. So I feel like in our practice, what we're really trying to focus on is like removing as much interference as we can, and the body will heal itself, and that can, like we shared earlier, like that can look like many different things: chemical, emotional, physical, the infections that you were talking about, like all of that can interfere. So anything you can do to bring down that burden on the body, and the body will function more the way that it's supposed to. But it's really, really difficult. And I'm seeing in younger and younger people, I'm kind of just amazed sometimes. I mean, I just did lab work on a 16-year-old boy not too long ago where his testosterone is in the toilet. It's just heartbreaking to see some of what's going on. This is a young man who plays video games all the time. He's not outside, just a lot of the things that culturally are kind of acceptable or normal are not supporting like our body's design. And so there's so much that we kind of need to look at, I think, on a much bigger, broader range as to like, we need to be incorporating a lot of these things to support what's going on, because to your point, like cell phones aren't going away. So like, let's make sure that we're getting outside and, offsetting some of the damage with some of these things, because we're living in the most toxic time in history,
Yeah, that's where I'm at. It's like the world is the way it is, and it's actually just going to keep progressing.
Okay. Yep.
The technology is just going to continue, and there's some amazing things that come with that. But to keep up with that, we need a different understanding of health than we've had in the past. And really, I think health in past generations could be taken for granted. You lived in this world, and if you didn't have any childhood ailments or
right,
genetic disease or something like that, like people would live, they were fairly sturdy and healthy. And nowadays, it's not a given. If we just kind of go through the day-to-day life as things are set up now, there's a lot of hits to health, from all, things you mentioned. The chemicals are a big one too, and just the higher stress level. So it takes some different understanding of health to work with that. And I think on the positive side, like as a person finds the right things for them, they can do it. I think you can have the cell phones, you can have the fast pace of life. And there's great strategies. Some of the technology, the devices you mentioned, there's other things working for us. But it takes a little bit of focus to get it right. You can't just roll out of bed every day and do whatever you want. Or some of us do, and then eventually we pay that bill.
I just saw some research recently that showed by 2025, I think it's at like 49% of the population is going to have like chronic health challenge, chronic disease. And I just thought,
2025?
Yeah, 2025.
Wow.
Like we're headed in that direction. And I thought it's just been so weird for me to have been in practice as long as I have and just see the progression with that, where even I've told this story to my clients before. I remember back in the 90s when I was working in that skincare clinic I mentioned, and there was one lady that came to us that had like these crazy hormone stuff going on. Like her skin was reflective of all this hormone imbalance. And it was just so bizarre because it was like a one-offer kind of thing. It was like a case that kind of stood out. And I'm telling you now, Josh, like probably I really can't think of anybody that comes to me initially that doesn't have some sort of hormonal imbalance going on. It's bizarre. So to have watched that shift happen over the years, it's like, oh yeah, like there's just so many things playing into that. But to your point, there are amazing strategies to support all of what's going on. And we know as practitioners, right? Like when, we were at that seminar a few weeks ago, you look around and you're like, man, this is what it's supposed to look like, because these people are healthy and thriving and vibrant because they have the tools and the resources to support that. And what a great privilege it is to be able to share that with our clients too.
Yeah, exactly. That's the rewarding side, the fun side of it all. And the great thing is like once people get it, it's a lifetime. They take it with them for a lifetime. Good health, they'll take that for years and decades, and they can pass what they learned on to, kids, family, friends, and spread it around. Yeah, it is great. Couple last questions for you. One is, as you were talking there about hormones and just kind of the more complex cases that are common now, what's your favorite lab test that you run, or what do you run most commonly that you find gives you a picture and maybe helps answer questions for people that have been searching for a long time?
So like pertaining to hormones specifically, or just in general, like
in general? As people come in.
Yeah, we do a lot of blood chemistry. And I feel like once you have really good education in functional blood chemistry, there's a lot that you can garner from that information. So, I always kind of share with my clients, like, any lab work is just a snapshot in time, right? And so I feel like if you have some of that information to put the pieces of the puzzle together, man, there's some really amazing things that you can figure out from all of that. So going back to, I know there's different types of like hormone testing that people will do that dial in very specific things. But in all honesty, I have kind of felt like you have to get to the root cause of why that sort of thing is happening in the first place, that I haven't really, from my perspective at this point, have not seen the value in all of that when you can really dial in some good blood work to put all of those pieces of the puzzle together. So that's really where we start with foundationally with people, is just a pretty comprehensive blood chemistry panel, including hormones as well. And going back to like, we'll just maybe sometimes work with some supportive natural things when we see hormone levels that are off, or how to support raising them a little bit naturally while we're working on some of the other pieces of the puzzle. But, I'm sure you're aware, you can look at different infections that might be going on and that sort of thing with some of that blood chemistry as well. So I feel like that's pretty foundational. If somebody's presenting some really crazy symptoms that we see on that clinical assessment form, we might do some further testing for, like we use Vibrant's total tox burden test and look at some, different chemicals, maybe mycotoxins, heavy metals, some of those things. If we feel like that's something that's warranted and would benefit the client, if we knew a little bit more specifically about what might be going on. So for instance, if somebody was presenting, like on the clinical assessment form with a lot of symptoms indicative of mycotoxin or mold exposure, well, shoot, if they're living in it, it's going to be really hard to move the needle with some of our other stuff if they're getting like some crazy exposure all the time. And so sometimes doing some of those lab tests will help us figure out if there is something like that going on. But that's typically, there would need to be a reason for us to suggest something like that. When we foundationally look at blood chemistry, sometimes we can figure out all we need to know from there and don't need to kind of address anything else and just reassess later. So, but I would say that's kind of where we start, and then we'll kind of go from there. And like I shared, the gut zoomer is another one that we'll run. But primarily, if somebody's having a lot of symptoms that would show a need for running something like that. And then we always weigh, like, how supportive is that? Like, how much is that going to benefit them and in like long-term success? So for instance, there have been situations when we've done like a gut zoomer where somebody has like a pretty serious pathogen situation going on. They got some infection going on, and that kind of needs to be addressed first, right? So there's other things that need to be addressed, but if we didn't know that particular situation was going on, it might be harder for us to get where we need to go without knowing that.
Right. Yeah, I love it. I think it's a great way to use labs overall. Like you said, first get a look under the hood, see what's going on, but big picture, because again, people can waste so much time and money chasing, one lab marker, one line item on a lab test, but a lot of those, many line items can move if you get, some of these underlying health principles moving in the right direction. And then, of course, like you said, sometimes you find things that are maybe in your intake, you hear things about their history or symptomology, and it does need a closer look. And I think that's a really smart use of the labs.
Sometimes some of those, the investment in some of those labs is so much that we'll recommend, unless somebody really, wants to know specifically, they're wanting to know specifically, like what might be causing, some of what's going on. We may put them through a protocol. A protocol to address the full gamut might be less expensive than some of those labs, and it's always going to be helpful, So we've had people do it that way too, where we'll based on symptomology and some other things and the basic blood chemistry, we'll map out a protocol for them. And then if they're not getting, they're moving the needle, but it's not like full resolution, then we might suggest labs later down the road. More extensive labs.
Right, for sure. Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I wanted to hop back to the reactions a little bit, these skin flares or eczema outbursts. But on the positive side, do you ever see that being more of like a healing reaction? It's like the body's clearing something, you've hit a deeper layer, it needs to get rid of toxins or go through its process, and then when the person comes out on the other side, it's like, oh, they've clearly hit a new level, they feel better. Do you ever see that? And if so, how do you help people? I know one thing a lot of people struggle with is knowing, is this a little, an improvement overall? Am I just going through a healing reaction, or am I getting worse? Is this, going through the same old thing again and things aren't changing?
Yeah, skin can be such a tough one because you're right. I mean, that's where it's going to dump. You always tell people your bowels, your urinary tract, your liver, your lymph, and your skin are all organs of elimination, right? So like it's going to go somewhere when we're doing detoxification. And since we, so much of the cellular detoxification is necessary for the body to function properly, you're having to kind of address some of those components in order to get true healing. And you're right, you're going to see it in the skin a lot of times. So, and I always tell my clients, sometimes when you see that sort of thing, just, hey, no, we're poking the bear a little bit. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but we'll dial back the protocol a little bit. So we'll either put them on a more sensitive dose, or a strategy that we have found really to be very helpful too is a strategy where we'll titrate in a little different way, where we'll have them do a full dose one time. They may have some reactivity there, but they won't do anything maybe for the next 5 days. Or like, say it was a parasite product that kind of really poked the bear a little bit. We won't have them do that for another 5 days. And then after 5 days, we'll have them do it one time again, and then go to 4 days, then 3 days. And it just acclimates the body a little bit differently. Sometimes it will cut down on some of those symptoms. So just depending on where how the client wants to approach that, sometimes we'll just lower dosage a little bit or support drainage pathways with supplementation. Sometimes, we can work with different modalities, castor oil packs and that sort of thing can be very supportive as well. So there's just different things that we can look at to support the body a little bit too during that process. So, and once again, we just try to work with some of those things topically and just let them know, hey, to have some of this symptomology is not necessarily a bad thing, but we don't want it to be like super grueling and painful for them either. And that's why it's always been really fun for us to have some of those other tools to help support that while they're going through some of the other, longer game strategies to really promote long-term healing too.
Yeah. It can be quite a balancing act, but I agree that kind of mix or bringing those things in so people can keep moving forward on
Yes.
the detox side, the supplement side is really helpful. Great. Well, amazing. It's wonderful to hear your approach and these things you're doing. I wish I had found practitioners like you about 10 years earlier on my health journey, but it's really, I really resonate with a lot of what you're saying in your approach. And I think it's like we talked about, I think it's really just great for to have people out there like you that are spreading this knowledge, this way of thinking, so that in our advanced, stressful, technology-driven world,
Yes.
People can be healthy, feel good, and enjoy those things too. Where can people find out more about you or inquire about working with you?
So, we've got our website, cooperhealthsolutions.com, is a joint effort with my husband and I. We've been working together, trying to kind of combine our practices. And that's a great place. My business was originally Skin Side Out. So there's skinsideoutskincare.com. And then I'm also on social media too. So I'm _Heidi Cooper on Instagram, and there's a YouTube channel as well. So, try to really provide some valuable content for people that's not going to cost them anything either in those spaces, some things for them to kind of be able to implement themselves, and work with some of those supportive strategies. And then, if they're interested in working with us, we've really got some really great stuff to be able to support where they are with their skin and hormone stuff as well.
Perfect. Love it. Well, Heidi, thank you again for being on the show, for sharing your knowledge with us and everyone listening. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Josh. I really appreciate the opportunity to share this information with your audience.
Hey there. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that you feel you're walking away wiser than before. I want to bring you even better episodes in the future. One way you can make sure that happens is by rating this podcast. The more of you who rate this podcast positively, the better guests I can bring you. Since you and I both know you're not going to do this later, I'll walk you through the 10-second process right now. All you have to do is follow along. Take out your phone and unlock it. Open up Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever app you listen on, and search for Wiser Than Before Podcast and click on the show. In Apple Podcasts, you have to scroll down towards the bottom, past the most recent episodes. When you get to the ratings and reviews section, click on the blank stars to rate. In Spotify, beneath the logo and name of the show, you'll see 3 horizontal dots. They're just to the right of the bell and settings icons. Click those 3 dots, and the second option is to rate the show. Hit the blank stars and fill them in. All done. You can cross that off your to-do list and start looking forward to even better episodes in the future. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week, even wiser than before.